The dinner was supposed to last 2 hours. It ended in 4 minutes. My name is Claire Whitman, and I want to tell you about the night my family decided, without a vote, without a discussion, that I no longer belong to them. I want to tell you about the 6 weeks that followed, and about how quiet a person can stay while everything around her collapses. This isn't a story about revenge. Revenge was never the plan. But by the end of it, half my family would understand why silence can be the loudest thing a person ever does. The restaurant my parents chose was the kind with white tablecloths and a wine list nobody in my family could actually read. My mother had booked the private room in the back, the one with the arched windows that looked out over the river. She told me on the phone 3 days earlier that this dinner was long overdue. 11 years of work, for promotions and finally, regional director. I remember standing in front of my closet that evening trying on 3 different blouses, wanting to look like someone who deserved a seat at that table. I didn't know yet that deserving had nothing to do with what was coming. 22 people sat around that table. Aunts I saw twice a year, cousins with kids who kept sliding under the tablecloth, my father at the head, my mother to his right, and Daniel, my older brother, 2 years ahead of me in age and in his own mind several decades ahead of me in wisdom, seated directly across from me, close enough that I could see exactly how carefully he was watching the room before he stood up. He tapped his glass with a fork. The sound cut through the chatter like a blade through fabric. "I want to say something," Daniel said, smiling the smile he always used right before he hurt someone. "We're here to celebrate Claire's promotion, and that's great." "Really?" He paused, letting the word really hang there just long enough to feel wrong. "But I think it's funny, you know, that she's about to be in charge of a regional budget, when a few years ago she was calling Dad at midnight, because she couldn't cover her own rent." The table went quiet in that specific way a room goes quiet when everyone senses a car accident about to happen, but nobody moves to stop it. "Daniel," I said, keeping my voice even, "that's not. I'm not trying to embarrass you," he said, in the tone people use right before they do exactly that. "I'm just saying it's kind of ironic, right? The girl who couldn't manage $400 is about to manage $4 million. He laughed, and here's the part that still sits in my chest like a stone. My father laughed with him. Not a small, uncomfortable laugh. A real one, head tilted back, hands slapping the table once. My Aunt Carol, 3 seats down, added, "Well, we all make mistakes when we're young," in the tone of someone trying to be kind and instead pouring salt directly into the wound. My mother said nothing. She looked at her plate. I sat there with my water glass in my hand, and I felt something I can only describe as the floor tilting very slowly beneath me. The way it does in the moment right before you understand that everyone in a room has already decided something about you, and no words you say are going to undecide it. "I asked Dad for help once," I said quietly, "and I paid it back within 4 months. You know that, Daniel." Sure, he said, waving a hand, already moving on, already sensing he'd landed the blow he wanted. Congrats, Ace. Seriously." He raised his glass. My father raised his. 20 other glasses lifted around the table. Mine stayed on the tablecloth, untouched, my fingers still wrapped around the stem. "I want you to understand something about me before I go further. I don't raise my voice. I never have. Some people mistake that for weakness. I've learned slowly and expensively that it's actually the opposite." I stood up, folded my napkin and said, "Thank you for the dinner. I have an early morning." Nobody stopped me. Nobody followed me into the parking lot. I sat in my car for 6 minutes without starting the engine, watching my own hands shake against the steering wheel. And then I drove home in complete silence. At 11:47 that night, my phone lit up with a message from my mother. "After tonight, your father, and I think it's best if you stay away from family events going forward. Daniel says you've made him feel attacked for years, and we're tired of the tension. This is for everyone's peace." I read it twice, then a third time, waiting for a part of it to change. The way you check a wound twice hoping the second look will hurt less. Daniel liked the message. I could see the little heart notification appear less than a minute after my mother sent it, which told me everything I needed to know about who had actually written it. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I typed one sentence back to my mother. "Understood. I'll also be removing my name from Dad's business loan by the end of the month. Asterisk. Then I turned my phone face down on the nightstand and lay in the dark for a long time, listening to the refrigerator hum in the kitchen, thinking about a decision I'd made 2 years earlier that nobody at that table even remembered existed. Here's what none of them knew, because I had never told them, because I had never wanted anyone to feel like they owed me anything for it. 2 years before that dinner, my father's hardware business had come within 11 days of losing its lease. The bank had rejected his own loan application twice. His credit was too thin, too much debt already on the books from a bad expansion the year before. Daniel managed the books, but Daniel's name alone wasn't enough for the bank either. I was the one with the credit history strong enough to co-sign. I drove out on a Tuesday afternoon, sat across from a loan officer named Mr. Aldana, and signed my name to $84,000 I would be legally responsible for if the business ever failed. I never mentioned it again. Not once. I didn't want gratitude. I wanted my father to keep the business he'd built with his hands. I didn't remove my name that night to punish anyone. I want to be honest about that because what happened afterward looked, to my family, like an act of war. It wasn't. It was simply the truth catching up to a decision I had quietly been protecting them from for 2 years. By 7 the next morning, I had 63 missed calls. Daniel called first at 6:52 a.m. I let it ring out. He called again at 6:54, and again at 6:57. When I finally picked up, his voice wasn't angry. It was careful, controlled, almost gentle. And that, more than anything, is when I understood how dangerous my brother actually was. "Claire," he said, "you need to call the bank back. This is a misunderstanding. Dad's account got frozen this morning because of some flag on the loan status. You didn't actually mean to remove yourself, right? You were upset. I get it. Let's just fix this quietly, family to family." "I meant it," I said. There was a silence on the line, and in that silence I heard something I hadn't expected. Not rage, but recalculation. Daniel was thinking. "Fust. You'll bankrupt Dad," he said finally, softer now. "Is that what you want? Over one comment at dinner?" "This isn't about the dinner," I said and hung up. My mother called next, crying in a way that sounded almost rehearsed, telling me I was tearing the family apart, that I'd always been the dramatic one, that Daniel had only been joking. I told her I loved her and that I needed some time, and I meant both things completely. 3 days later, everything changed. The first real twist in a story I still hadn't fully understood myself. My cousin Priya, the only person at that dinner who had texted me an apology the very same night, sent me a message at 9:14 p.m. Asterisk, "You need to see this. I'm so sorry." Asterisk attached were screenshots, private messages between Daniel and a supplier named Wickham Steel Supply, dated across 14 months. In them, Daniel was quietly arranging inflated invoices, skimming the difference into a separate account. And this was the part that made my stomach drop, referencing Claire's name on the loan, as the reason nobody at the bank would ever look closely enough to notice. The failure story at dinner hadn't been an accident, and it hadn't been about protecting the family's reputation. It had been insurance. If anyone ever asked questions about the business's finances, Daniel had already spent years quietly positioning me as the reckless one, the unreliable one, the one whose name on paperwork could never be trusted. He wasn't humiliating me for fun. He was building a narrative one dinner at a time, in case he ever needed a scapegoat. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I drove to Mr. Aldana's office instead, laid out everything Priya had sent alongside the original loan documents, and asked one simple question. Was this fraud, or was I imagining it? It took the bank's internal review team 9 days to answer that question properly, and those 9 days were the longest of my life. I went to work every morning, sat in meetings, approved budgets, smiled at colleagues who had no idea what was happening in my family, and came home every night to silence and uncertainty. Twice, Daniel texted me offers to handle it privately. Once my father called, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it, and asked if what people were saying about Daniel was true. I told him I didn't know yet. I wasn't lying. I genuinely didn't, not fully, not until the second twist arrived. The bank's investigators found that the skimming wasn't 14 months. It was closer to 3 years, nearly $200,000 in inflated invoices, funneled through a shell account registered under a name I recognized instantly. My mother's maiden name. Not my mother herself. A cousin of hers Daniel had convinced to open the account temporarily, years ago, for reasons she claimed she never fully understood. My mother hadn't known about the fraud, but she had known for at least a year that something about the business's numbers didn't add up. And she had said nothing, because Daniel had told her it would destroy the family if it came out. She chose silence to protect a lie, the same way she'd chosen silence at that dinner table to protect a comment that wasn't fair to me either. That was the third twist, the one that hurt the most. My mother's silence at the dinner table and her silence about the fraud came from the exact same place. She had spent years choosing peace over truth, and both times, it was me who absorbed the cost. When my father finally sat across from the bank's findings, spread out on his own kitchen table, he didn't speak for almost a full minute. I watched his hands, the same hands that had built shelving units in that hardware store for 30 years, tremble slightly against the edge of the paper. Then he looked up at me and said 4 words. "I'm sorry. Come home." I didn't answer right away. I thought about the dinner, about his laugh rising with Daniel's, about how easy it had been for him to raise a glass to a joke at my expense and how hard it now was for him to say 2 small words. But I also knew grief when I saw it, and this was grief, for the son he thought he understood, and for the daughter he'd failed to protect. Daniel never apologized, not really. What he offered instead, in a final phone call 3 weeks later, was almost impressive in its calculation. "Let's keep this between family," he said. "I'll pay it back quietly. No lawyers, no charges. You don't want to be the sister who sent her own brother to prison, Claire. Think about how that looks." That was the fourth twist. Not a plot event, but a mirror. He was still trying to write the story where I was the villain. Right up until the moment the evidence made that impossible. I told him the truth doesn't ask permission to come out, and that this time, I wasn't the one who would decide how it looked. The bank made that decision. Daniel was charged with fraud 6 weeks later. He avoided prison through a plea agreement, restitution, 5 years probation, and a permanent note on his financial record that ended any future business dealings requiring credit checks or licensing. My father sold the hardware store within the year. Not out of ruin but out of exhaustion. He told me, the last time we spoke about it, that he didn't recognize the business anymore once he understood what had been running underneath it for 3 years. My mother and I speak now, carefully, slowly, in the particular way people rebuild something after finding out it was never as solid as they believed. Priya and I are closer than we've ever been. She tells people now, half joking, that she's the only cousin who chose the right side before it was obvious which side was right. And Daniel calls sometimes on holidays, in a voice that's learned humility the way some people learn a language late in life, imperfectly, with an accent that never fully disappears. I think about that dinner often, the 22 glasses raised while mine sat untouched on the tablecloth. I think about how certain everyone was in that moment, that they understood exactly who I was. What none of them understood was that the same quiet strength they mistook for weakness that night was the very thing that would later reveal what my brother had spent 3 years hiding. I didn't destroy my family the day I removed my name from that loan. I simply stopped being the only person willing to carry a weight nobody else even admitted existed. The lesson from the story. Sometimes the people who call you a failure in front of a crowd are the ones most afraid of what you'll find if you ever stop staying quiet. Protecting people who humiliate you isn't loyalty. It's just delaying the truth.